Welcome to the Apeiron Life podcast. Pretty lucky to be here with Troy Taylor. Troy's the Senior Director of Performance with Tonal, but I've known you, Troy, for a number of years now. Probably first caught up when you were with the U.S. ski team, and I thought maybe to kick things off, tell us a little bit about some of your professional experiences before you started working with Tonal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, number one, it's great to be here. Always fun to chat with you. Before moving to Tonal, I spent close to 20 years or so, not too dissimilar to yourself, mainly working in Olympic sport. My confused accent is from Britain. So grew up there, sportsman, sports player, went to university, did an undergraduate degree in sports science, master's degree in physiology. At Loughborough, when I was there, I started volunteering, helping out British swimming that were training around there and kind of getting my first taste of sort of working in applied sports science.
Was that when the Aussies coaches were over?
That's Bill Sweetenham.
Yeah, Bill Sweetenham. Yeah,
but I got the legendary Bill for a while.
Yeah.
It turns out my first probably 5 bosses were all Australian because of the migration after the AIS in 2000 Olympics. And so, sort of actually found something I really liked. Was really fortunate through that sort of internship with British Swimming to get a job at the University of Birmingham in Asker Jenkendrop's lab, working with some university students and some British track and field athletes for the Athens Games. And really over the next 15-ish years, I date myself, but sort of built a career in exercise physiology, in sports science. I sort of took a job after the Athens game over in the US for US Ski and Snowboard for the first time around. So I worked for Andy Walsh and Sue Robson in for the Trino Games. Went back to Britain for a little while. I ended up in Canada as a Director of Science and Medicine for the Canadian Sport Institutes up there in Toronto for the Toronto 2015 Pan Am Games. Worked for a bunch of different sports in different places over there. And then, 2015 came back to US Ski Team as the high performance director. That's probably when we got reconnected around then.
I'd heard about you before because of the Loughborough. You skipped over that a little bit. For those people that are listening, this background's rich because you said you went to university, but Loughborough I'd say is one of the premier sports science universities in the UK. And then some of the groups you worked with, they're not just hanging out with a swim squad. You're talking about some of the most decorated swim coaches in the business. And then US Skiing was on a roll when you started working in with them. So those experiences, they sound like you're just hanging out with sport, but these are the ones winning the big stuff, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, really cool. And completely, for a lot of it, accident, didn't really necessarily realize. I think I was maybe a little more strategic later in my career. At the early stages, I was like, I've been skiing twice in the Alps. I'm like, US Ski Team sounds cool. I'm like, let's go do that. That would be fun. But and in hindsight, with people like Bill Sweetenham in swimming, with, the team that they built at US Ski Team sort of back then and sort of coming back. Yeah, really, really fortunate to be around a lot of great people and hopefully picked up a few things from some of them.
Oh, yeah. And then I like you said, we both have kind of walked similar paths because then this moment comes and, it's all about, the 1%ers and aggregation marginal gains and looking for, you're working with skiers and it's getting the wax right in snow conditions and just being ultimately right on the right day, regardless of any conditions. And then you transition into essentially it's almost like population health, public health. It's like health and wellness for life. And you're starting to work in with a product. So talk a bit about that transition. You're still using a lot of the same thinking, but now you're talking about working with a company that's producing a product that could really help the world be healthier.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if it's old age but it gets to a point in your career, I've been, I think, in and around 7 Olympic Games, something like 50 Olympic medalists or so, and not done it all by any stretch of the imagination, but felt I'd kind of put a good stock in there. And at the ski team, I was sort of working a lot in, this from Australia and in Britain and in Canada. A lot of the time is when you want to run an innovation project, you write a nice grant to the government and you say you're going to do this and we're going to improve performance by X or Y. And they give you some of money, not always a lot, but enough to get your project done and then you go along. In US sport, that doesn't really exist. And Troy Flanagan, who I took over from at the US Ski Team, who's now at the Milwaukee Bucks, him and Andy Walsh before that, very innovative people, very sort of cutting edge in terms of what they do. So there's this kind of mystique of, being on the very front edge at US Ski Team. And I was like, well, I can't write these grants to do these innovations. How am I going to do it? And, the ski team, there's a lot of philanthropy donors, a lot of San Francisco, Silicon Valley types. So I started sort of consulting and working and trying to bring sort of technology into elite sport. And I really enjoyed it, loved it, like sort of loved the buzz and the energy. And it reminded me of the first few years of working in sport where there's unbound opportunity and you're always pushing. And so I really loved that vibe. And so, when it came around to 2021 or so, I'd got a tonal for Michaela Schifrin actually at the start of lockdown of COVID. I loved the kit. I thought it was an incredible piece of hardware. I'd spent way too much money buying various different hardware over the years. So I felt I was a good judge of this isn't just a home fitness piece of equipment, but this is actually legit training equipment. So that was number one. And then, number two and number three is really around like the opportunity to take hopefully this knowledge that I've learned from working with the best people in the world and apply that to a much larger data set and a lot larger impact of people certainly is exciting to be able to kind of apply a lot of that. And thirdly was the data that they create. And, tonal samples at 50 hertz, so 50 times a second for every single lift. So every rep, and it's, I think, somewhere between 4 and 5 billion reps right now that have been lifted on tonal, is stored, cataloged, anonymized and safe and things like that. But you can start to run these really sort of ask questions and hopefully answer questions that with an N of 10 elite athletes, you just never have an opportunity to do. And it's not just a 2 or 4 or 6 or even 16-week training study, but these people are training on tonal for multiple years of their life. And so I think there's a real opportunity to impact that. So
yeah, it's so cool. And I think that's a perfect little segue. We'll probably maybe one comment and then we'll segue into this amazing report that Tonal's produced, because I think a lot of the members that we work with at Apeiron Life will find some of these trends really, really quite interesting. And at Apeiron Life, we have a number of clients. They first get introduced to Tonal here. They'll come in and they'll just, they'll go through their test battery, their physical assessment, and then they see this Tonal on the wall. And a lot of our, strength conditioning coaches, they use it for a variety of purposes. And it's amazing how easy it kind of just sells itself. Like people will say, I want one of those in my home. So they're like, once I try it, I'm off and running. Let's get going.
We definitely appreciate you for your sales work. No, it's
funny. It's not even sales work. It's selling itself. Like you haven't trained any of our people to sell Tonal, but it sits there. They like the look. They know it'll fit in their house. And once they try it, they're like, oh, this could keep me motivated to keep going. So
yeah, exactly. Like, I think something like 50% of people that demo a Tonal buy a Tonal. So
that's really interesting. Yeah, I can see why. Yeah.
Such a kinesthetic experience and pulling on them. So the first time you switch on like weights with the Bluetooth button, it's just kind of semi-magical.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm biased around there, but for someone that spent way too much on equipment like this, it's like, it's still pretty, it makes me smile every time I switch it on.
Well, the other thing I think we might hit on just a tiny bit, because there's kind of a shared connection. Both you and I have spent time around Jeff Yang, who's founder of this Apeiron Life, but was inspired by the US Ski Team and US Ski and Snowboard. He loved what you guys were building up there. He loved how high performance science was allowing individuals to like tap into newfound performance capabilities. And he says it a lot when he talks to his friends and talks to us, how it was a real catalyst to say, if Olympians can have this team around them and they can have all these thoughtful insights on how to prioritize their time and how to build, evidence-based progressions, and they can kind of perform at levels we've never seen anyone perform. He's saying, like, I can afford it. Why can't I get my own team around me? So you're connected to him through the high performance sports side. And then I'm now more connected to him through the Apeiron Life. Let's try to capture some of these themes and spread it out to more people, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff, I think, joined the ski team board, the foundation board in 2002, which was just before I joined, but right at the right kind of things where they honestly, at that time, there was just not a lot of cutting edge sports science happening in the US at all. Like NFL, basketball were decades from realistically kind of getting to there. And so really, really forward thinking. And it's really cool to see that catalyst and the manifestations it can take, because my path to Tonal is not wildly dissimilar. Yes, it's a slightly different scale. You guys are very holistic kind of things, but bringing evidence-based approaches on scale to a large, like non-elite athlete population.
Yeah.
And I will say, shout out to Jeff. He was one of the funders of some of the programs that we ran for technology.
He's amazing at raising funding. Yeah. Raising funds in a variety of different ways. So this is a good time. I want to spend kind of the rest of our time on this state of strength report you guys put together, because, it'd be easy for Tonal, like a lot of companies, to just, sizzle it up in some ways that, attract attention, but don't necessarily have a lot of substance in it. But you decided to do this really in-depth report based on all the data you're collecting on all of the users. So maybe set us up a little bit on what led you to do this report, and then we'll kind of walk through it a bit and gain some insights, because I think they're fascinating insights, really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, it's been a project I and others at Tonal have wanted to do for, honestly, the 3 years ago since I joined, but it takes a while, takes a lot of data science power to kind of do. But what we really wanted to do was take we see our Tonal data set. Yes, it's a Tonal data set, but it's massive. It's undoubtedly the world's largest strength training data set. Yeah. I think the data report, which isn't the entire data set, but was 175,000 plus people were included for over more than a year of training. For people like David and I, we spent our careers with ends of 10.
20 if you're lucky.
And it's not even the entire data set, but we wanted to share, we wanted to get that out there because we feel that's a really good snapshot of just people and training. Yes, it's Tonal data. Yes, it's slightly different to there, but I think it really gives you a really sort of general sense into how people train, what's associated with different trainings, what some of the outcomes and changes people can make with training. And what we didn't want to do, as much as maybe my marketing would like to, I didn't want to cherry pick. Right. Hey, let's look at the top 20% who train 4 times a week and only do that. And it would look great for Tonal. There's no doubt. They make some incredible training. I'm like, we want to look at everyone. I think we set the minimum bar at they needed to train on Tonal at least 3 times in a year. Right. And have maybe a 5% consistency, which means you work out at least once every 20 weeks. Right. Very, very low bar. And let's share median and mean data for that entire group. And let's get it out there, because I think, yes, it's not as amazingly flashy as 400% changes, but it's still on relatively small amounts, make massive changes. And so, the idea was to get it out there. Yes, it's an industry level report. It's not a scientific peer reviewed publication. But the idea was to put a lot of the rigor and hypothesis that we might do into something more like a peer review paper and bring that into a report. And honestly, this is the first step. Hopefully many more to come. Oh,
I loved it. And one of the first things I looked at right off the bat, because a lot of the Apeiron Life members that we work with, 40s, 50s, 60s are probably most common. We do have 70-year-olds and even a couple 80-year-olds. And so I was really interested when I first looked at the report, who's doing resistance training at home, kind of period. But in this particular report, we're saying who's using Tonal to try to increase strength through men and women and different age groups. And it was quite broad. I think there was one, I saw a percentage. Is there an 80-year-old that's using it?
Yeah, there's an 80-year-old. There's actually, I think there's a couple of 90-year-olds, but we cut the level that we had to have. I forget what the end was, but at least 100 people or something. There wasn't 190-year-olds.
I got you.
But there were some 90s. The easy definition I say is 18 to 80.
That's amazing.
And it's concentrated around 35 to 55. And so that's where the center of the bell curve is. But certainly you can go down, and the 18 is probably a little high. Certainly there's teenagers training for sport with their parents' commission. On
that's right.
On that kind of side. And on the upper end, there's some 80-year-olds that were included in the report. Something around 55% male, 45% female. So pretty decent gender split. If you're aware of the research in this space, it tends to be on almost exclusively male 20 to 24-year-old college students. And so, a very diverse data set across wide range, multiple sexes. So it was really good.
And so it's interesting, isn't it? The message is getting out there. I think when I was going through graduate school, cardio was king. If you want to have a long, healthy life, find your training zone, be consistent, get your steps in. But it feels like, women are hearing the message and older individuals are hearing the message that resistance training is super important for overall health.
Yeah, it's been incredible since even in the last, I would say, decade or so of how that's come into public knowledge, and I think it's awesome. Like I remember, being as an undergraduate in sports science and resistance training being a thing for sport, but wasn't really thought as a health and wellness technique. It wasn't really thought as something of it there. If anything, it was like maybe negative because of bodybuilding or kind of perspectives around there. And I think we've seen that shift 180, where I think you can't go, if you're on PubMed in the research, there's an article published probably on a daily basis, but in Gen Pop, New York Times or Washington Post, whoever it might be, and specifically with those two populations, the role of strength for not just lifespan, but health span and improving health span and maintaining health span, I think is huge. And I love our data set for that. I think there's more than 20,000 over 55-year-olds that are included in this particular report.
And I think about, one thing in the report I was kind of scanning through because it's usually one theme that people will talk to us about, especially the women, I think more so than the men. But the men will use this as a not an excuse, but as a comment is I don't want to get hurt. I jumped in a gym. They bashed me. I tried a CrossFit gym. I'm not saying anything bad about CrossFit. I'm just saying that got really popular. A lot of people jumped into it. Barry's Boot Camp, not saying anything bad about it. A lot of people did it. These kind of, they're not fads, but these movements, they generate a lot of interest. And for those 50, 60, 70-year-olds we see, they come in and they're like, I'm a little bit worried here, buddy, because man, my back was jacked. I hurt my knee. They just go in with reckless abandonment. When you're 20, you kind of get away with it and you can get quite fit. But thoughts about, any commentary on injury, because the tonal it's a bit of different type of lifting device, and the programs are kind of put together a little bit differently to try to, it looks like, help safety.
Yeah, it's a big component. And actually, I think in the report itself, we actually see, I'm not sure if it's complete dose response, but the older members are more likely to be beginners. So the people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s are more likely to self-identify as beginner to doing that. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, with our product that's particularly unique is, I talked about that Bluetooth weight on and off right now, so you don't have to lift up anything. Like you can unclick it at the time. There's a spotter mode that never have to worry. Like, a spotter will help you out if you ever get too close or you're hurt. Yeah. Essentially AI does that for you, and the weights just turn off magically if you start struggling too much. And I think the other big thing is around suggested weights, and starting people at like an appropriate suggested weights. It's tough to know, if you're new to the gym, you've never worked out, well, I see everyone else putting 25s or 35 pounds, whatever I should do. Maybe you can only do 10 or 15. And so we do a strength assessment. Again, it's kind of uses isokinetics, very safe way of testing strength, used a lot in physio and rehab. So we sort of use some smarts there. And some AI algorithms to make sure that you're lifting the appropriate amount for you. And then we use another algorithm, lots of algorithms, but another algorithm that tells you when you should progress.
Right.
So we look at
it's time to increase the load.
We look at the last few reps of every set. Did your velocity decrease? So are you lifting slower? How was your range of motion? Did we get a bunch of signals saying, hey, you're struggling or you're not? If we get a bunch of signals saying, hey, you're not struggling, we'll bump it up 1-2 pounds. We don't have to bump it up 10 or 20, bump it up a couple of pounds and you can go again. And so those sort of combinations create a really sort of relatively safe environment. It's not 100% safe. Weightlifting always will have a very minimal risk, although the injury profiles of lifting are small. And then from the programming side, Jenna on my team, along with the coaches, write an awful lot of the program. And one of the things that we've noticed is it's interesting. The more advanced you are or the more resistance trained you are, kind of our members, the more they want to push them hard. Like they want to go to the pain cave almost. Not true of beginners. The beginners, and there's a lot of research around this too, but RPE scales need to be more 5 and 6 rather than 8 or 9. Right. Enjoyment scales are highly correlated to their likelihood of coming back the next session. Yeah. If you've got, you do the first training session and you've got DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, for the next 7 days, chances of you wanting to do that leg session again are pretty small. So we have something called Quick Fit, so like 15-minute training sessions and kind of thing.
I've used those. They're great.
Yeah, lots of micro dosing, exercise snacks, and sort of progressions that allow there. And having a computer screen or a TV screen, a touch screen in front of you allows you to see the right form, get form feedback, see movement patterns, so you can kind of think. So yeah, a bunch of pieces in the technology that make it really, really functional for that particular age group.
I want to hit maybe just two more things. One is this, you mentioned it with enjoyment, and this idea of being consistent, which, as we know in elite sport as well as health and wellness, I love it when people go, so I'm going to work with you guys for 6 weeks, I get fitter, and then when will I have to do it again? You're like, look, buddy, this is life, man. This never stops. You got to keep moving. We can keep changing it up, but this is a lifestyle. This is something you're just going to do all the way until the end.
Yeah, it's not a 12-week preseason prep and then you go. No. And that's, I guess, can be intimidating for some people. They're like, all right, I'm signing up for stuff. And so I think it's about how you set the right habits to start with, right? It's about how you, I think the common analogy, I don't know who said it, but like the heaviest weight to the gym is like the door. Yeah,
without a doubt. Getting them in. And that's where I think you guys have been, exploring some boundaries on consistency. I remember in the report, it was some talks a little bit about, do you exercise in the morning or do you exercise at night? You just talked about the enjoyment. I think the instructors at Tonal are amazing. They're not over the top, rah, rah, rah. They're not boring and just like I've got 2 more of these to do before I'm done with the day. They're in a very professional studio, and I can see you're trying to get at what's going to keep them coming back for more, because if they come back for more, they're going to get gains. Like, it's going to happen, isn't it? So maybe talk about any of your thoughts or things that you saw as you put the report together on trying to help people become more consistent with their engagement.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the really unique things that the Tonal data set can kind of provide, is because we do have this longitudinal tracking. It's not a 12-week training study. It's not like you don't have to turn up to work out on Tonal. And so while we can't derive cause and effect, right, there's no A/B testing here necessarily, we can understand what's correlated. What do the most consistent people do? The people that work out more. What are the hallmarks of success, as it were? And so there's a bunch of things. I'll talk around some that aren't in the report, and then I'll get to the report. Like some of the things that we've noticed, I talked about enjoyment, and we have a star rating system kind of things. And you can mine that, and you can clearly see people that have more enjoy the workouts are more likely to come back quicker, sooner, and more frequently than people that don't. And it's about your individual scoring play. David's, he's a harsh rater. He always rates 3 out of 5, doesn't like my programming. Right. But like, if I get a 4 out of David, he's definitely coming back. If I get 1s and 2s, I'm struggling. Yes. I'm a 5-star guy. Like, I like 5s all the time. But if you see a 4 from me, I was like, I really messed up.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah, individual Z scores and changing that. So that would be number one. We look at a lot around on the programming side, like, how do we make it more interesting? I've got this real thought around people love familiarity with novelty, and I don't know how I quite balance those two. But
I know what you're saying.
I know I've seen this. This feels familiar, but is something unique about it. And so the example I often give in a programming sense, from a muscle physiology perspective, your sort of standard session might be, you're doing bench press for chest girth or whatever, you squats for glute girth, for increasing glute mass, and you'll probably do like 4 sets of 10. That would be like a very standard session kind of things, and you do that 4 sets, maybe take 60, 90, 2 minutes between recoveries, maybe a little longer between them, and go about your day. That's fine, and you can give that to an elite athlete, and they'll do it all day long, like, sure, no worries kind of things.
Yeah.
What we find is, from general population, is they need to do the squats. They need to work close enough to proximity to failure, right? It's got to be kind of hard to stimulate the muscle growth. But it doesn't matter if I do 6 reps, 8 reps, 10 reps, 12 reps, as long as I'm manipulating the resistance so I get the right proximity failure. So I play around a lot with programming with like back off sets or pyramid sets or ascending sets or descending sets or myo reps or drop sets or any other of these techniques that they're kind of termed advanced training. They're variety.
Yeah.
And the idea from me, from a training perspective, is if you enjoy that more, you're more likely to come back.
Yeah.
And so we add a lot of variety into the program, and that's been things. We also add a lot of time efficiency things into the program.
Yeah.
I very rarely, I released,
see that being very big. Yeah.
I released two workouts a year ago. They were the same workout, and one was done as like classic straight sets, 4x10, rest 2 minutes kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the same exercises, same reps, same sets, like almost identical training session, but one was more supersetted. So you're doing squats and then bench press. It was like an upper and a lower and alternating kind of things. Like way more people want to do because it took half the time, right? I can get same level of volume, similar proximity to failure. Research would suggest I get the same hypertrophy benefits by doing this. So time efficiency is huge for us, and variety would be number two. Some other things in the report, specifically as it related to consistency, we noted that people that sign up and follow a program way more consistent than people that are
just jumping in for
just
individual.
Jumping in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You imagine you go into the gym and you've not got a plan. You know, you walk around and like we've all been there. I've been there, and you're like, oh.
Or it's a crowded gym and you're just like, there's 3 things open. What am I going to do?
Yeah, exactly. And you're kind of making up on the fly. Not a great training session. Turns out you don't come back very often. People that sign up for a training program, maybe their predisposition, not cause and effect necessarily, but correlation. Maybe their predisposition to more likely have more commitment to do it. But like, I think it's something in the region of 12%, like more consistent just by signing up.
That's great.
And doing that.
And that's why you have in total, you can sign up for these programs, these 4-week programs, 6 weeks programs, or you can go in, if you just want an individual session, do it. But I see what you're saying. If you're committing to a program, your consistency is likely to be higher.
Yeah, it's the act of commitment. I believe, like leaning on the behavioral science of commitment devices. There's no punishment if you don't turn up to it. But we also, once you do that, you're in a program. And then we can send you a push notification saying your workout's tomorrow, or you've scheduled for this, which is again going to lean on. So that's number one. I would definitely encourage people to have a plan, and I think that makes a ton of sense. It doesn't really matter what the plan is.
Just got to have one.
Just have one. We do notice that the people that work out in the morning are slightly more consistent. And I don't attribute that to anything other than less things come up in your day to get in the way of going to the gym or going to work out on time.
Yeah. And like you said, the personalities of people that get up just a little earlier and commit are the kind of people that usually commit. And the ones that are like, let the day smash them and then hope to fit it in later in the day. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's anything special necessarily about working out in the morning, but it is associated with higher consistency. So if you don't mind working, if your phenotype lets you get up early in the morning, probably good to build it into your habits then if you can and it makes sense. There are plenty of people that work out late and are highly consistent, but having a narrow window of working out consistency is also important. So like if you sometimes work out at 8 and sometimes at 4 and sometimes at 6 or whatever, that's the kind of thing. The narrower the window, you normally work out at 9 a.m. or 5 p.m. doesn't matter, up to you, plus or minus 30 minutes. Great.
Yeah.
Start seeing that.
I love that. Yeah, that's
start
great.
Increasing outside of that window. What's going on? Like I know when my kids go back to school, my workouts change because like in the summer programs, like, daycare starts a little earlier. And so I can drop them off and then I go and work out immediately. In school time, I got to take them and the traffic's worse and it takes me a while and it throws off my entire day because I don't have the same amount of time. So having that workout consistency is really important. And then the final thing on consistency is some of the social elements of a connected device that I didn't actually expect necessarily to see. But like simple things like the amount of followers you have is associated with a significant increases in working out.
Right, because you can high five someone, you can tab them, can't you? When
you
people
can follow, you can see their workouts, and like it's like I can't remember what the exact stats are. I should have in front of me, but like having between 1 and 10 friends.
Right.
Like it doesn't need to be a huge number, but
these are online friends. These are ones that are connected to you through the device.
Through your device.
Isn't that amazing?
You meet them in the tonal community online and in Facebook and other things like that. And the other piece is like people who check their stats are more thing. And again, I'm not saying cause and effect. People that might check the stats work out more, but the process of engaging with your data is probably a decent one for you being more invested in it and therefore more likely to come back. Like I think I've listed 4.7 million pounds on tonal or something, and like I like to see the number go up. It's kind of gamification of it.
I've seen it when you do the reps. You have those little bar targets there, and you don't want them coming in under, do you? You want them in the zone.
Yeah, the 80% power bar is crushing me on some occasions, but no, it keeps intensity.
Yeah, it does. We got Donnie here who's helping us produce this podcast. Donnie doesn't mind a bit of time in the gym and very familiar with the tonal. And I think it'd be remiss of me to end this, Donnie, without giving you just a little chance. Anything that we've covered, or any thoughts as you listen to Troy, especially as it relates to some of the members, the people that we're working with here at Apeiron Life, that you might want him to touch on?
Oh boy. really putting me on the spot here.
Well,
here
it's only because
looking at the numbers and making sure that you're not cackling too loud. No. But I just had one. So like, I guess my question is, I mean, I personally really like the device. I am more of a just do it on my own, or is it like a supplement to what I'm already working out with, because we do have it in the gym here. But what is next for Tonal? What's in the pipeline is what I'm asking.
This is where I get in trouble with my product roadmap team and kind of thing.
Like I said, we don't edit this podcast, so whatever you say is gonna.
There's a lot, a real lot. Not much that I can say publicly. I would say I'm going to talk sort of more, let's say, holistical or big picture. Like we have, a lot of members working out, generating a lot of data. Unique data set. I think there's a few parallel paths that are coming together that is going to really make the next 24, 36, 48 months really interesting in a lot of spaces, particularly in fitness spaces. You've got one, obviously you've got generative AI and the whole kind of component there. And like having OpenAI or Barb or whatever the Microsoft's version of it, that's great and gives you a tool. But it's the people with the proprietary data sets that can add and feed and augment that sort of knowledge base and kind of things that I think are going to ram up with really, really interesting insights. Like if you look at the research literature and all Tonal members, if I gave you, there's a paper, I want to say it was Hubble 2005, but I could be wrong, but 500 people, all given exactly the same 12, 16-week training program. And the responses in strength were 0 to 250%, in hypertrophy from -5 to +65. Individual responses to training. And you think that everyone who's ever trained an athlete, or you yourself, they got this response, I didn't get that response.
Right.
And right now it's kind of tricky for us. It's a bit of trial and error, right? We have to okay, well, evidence-based, most people respond this way.
Right.
And so you start there and you titrate up or titrate down, you get feedback from your client around what's working. I think what the proprietary data sets in combination with Gen AI are going to allow this level of personalization and individualization at a much earlier phase. So rather than you having to train for 12 or 16 weeks before I can
to see if it
accurately
works.
muscle mass, I can take a bunch of people that look very similar to you, let's say, I'm in my 40s. Maybe, we identify that, it's reasonable. I think that you could say that, hey, the training volume of 40-year-olds may need to be, you could argue, higher because we're more anabolic resistant at this stage of our life, like, not things, but we might need more recovery.
Yeah.
And so we don't kind of things. And so, okay, well, if with the goal of muscle mass, male in their 40s with these these characteristics, hey, this is most likely based on our data set to be the most interesting. I think that's a really interesting.
Super interesting. And people talk about digital twins, which is a bit conceptual, but you're talking about if the database is large enough, I can say, not for now, today, I can look through a whole database over the last 10 years and say, there were 3 individuals that were responding almost exactly like you. And if we track them, these were the moments where they had their biggest gains. Why don't you try that? I mean, that's great.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, things around that. And I think this combination between like, my, not necessarily me, but my team, expert human performance and like expert big data AI, I think that's a really, really interesting space that's going to be changing a lot over the next couple of years. Yeah. So I think that would be the big one. I will say one other thing, just backtrack a little bit. One of the things that the data set illuminated to me was the size of the changes that people make, and particularly older people make when they start resistance training. Right. I think people are still not fully aware of the changes you can make in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe even in 80s in terms of muscle strength, definitely, and more likely muscle size as well. We don't measure muscle size directly, but as a proxy, you're getting stronger in terms of that. Like we're seeing huge gains on average. These are not people that are like, training 6 times a week. The average increase in 55+-year-olds is, I think, 70-something%.
It's incredible
in the first year. And like Tonal's great. Like you should definitely go and buy one. But that's strength training. That's, muscles no tension. We are a really great device, and I definitely think we're valuable in that space. Older people can make changes. And I think that's a message that sort of needs to continue to get out. I think they know they can get functionally better, It can improve my quality of life, but you can make some pretty dramatic strain changes, which is exciting. So I'm excited to lean into that space more, particularly with the, sort of that data set and data lens.
That makes good sense. And I think it's a really powerful message to end on. I think that, although we said tonal a lot in this whole, podcast, and that's where you're working, it's not just a tool to change a person's fitness. It's becoming a great instrument to understand this kind of population at large that we live in. What is the state that they're coming into, the tonal experience with? Some not very good, which is not a great it's not a great place. And, to say, why are so many 50, 67-year-olds so weak? That's not good. But then also, because of how the device is instrumented, you are actually being able to quantify, like you said, which is really optimistic, that things can change, and things can change in a big way, and also in a very meaningful way. So I think that's great. And I know you've got a lot on today, and you fit us in this morning. I really appreciate you swinging by. Keep up the good work. We'll keep letting people experience the tonal experience. And I think the chance we're a little microcosm of one group of individuals, and you've got this larger group, but the cross-sharing of ideas is really helpful for us. So thanks for coming by.
Thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy our conversations and sort of gleaning bits of information and sharing bits of information. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you.